The heavy wooden door closed with a soft click, and the sound seemed to absorb all the remaining energy from the room. I was alone. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was immense, a physical presence that pressed in on me from all sides. Our studio, which moments before had pulsed with the driving rhythm of the music and the heat of our bodies, was now just a vast, empty space. The air hung thick and still, carrying the lingering scent of her perfume, mixed with the salt of our shared exertion, and the faint, dusty smell of the old floorboards. In the pale rectangles of moonlight slanting through the high windows, tiny dust motes danced a slow, silent choreography of their own. My own skin felt loud in the quiet, my breath a ragged interruption of the stillness. I felt the absence of her body next to mine as a tangible thing, a sudden drop in temperature in the air she used to occupy. I slid my dancing shoes from my aching feet, the relief of the cool floorboards against my bare soles a small, grounding comfort. The wood was still warm in places, holding the ghost of our energy, a faint vibration that I could feel through the soles of my feet. It was as if the floor itself remembered the force of her steps, the power in her legs as she moved with me, and I stood there, simply trying to absorb that fading echo. My feet began to move on their own, a whisper of emotion, tracing the invisible patterns we had just spent hours perfecting. It was not a performance, but a ritual, an attempt to conjure her presence back into the room. My arms carved through the empty air, shaping the space where her body had been, my hands remembering the exact pressure needed to guide her through a turn. I moved through the familiar steps of our final routine, a ghost dancing with a ghost, my body a vessel for a memory that was still so intensely alive. Each step was a question, each turn a silent plea into the vast, indifferent emptiness of the studio. The movement brought me to the wall of mirrors, their cold surfaces reflecting a solitary figure. I watched myself complete the final pose, my arm outstretched to a partner who was no longer there. I saw the longing in my own eyes, the slight tremor in my hand. Leaning forward, I pressed my cheek against the cool, unyielding glass, right where her reflection had been just moments before. I closed my eyes, trying to feel her warmth, but the mirror offered only a chilling clarity, reflecting back nothing but the image of a woman alone in a dark room. The glass held no memory, only the stark truth of my solitude. My gaze broke from my reflection and caught on something left behind on the wide windowsill. It was her water bottle. In the ethereal moonlight, the simple plastic object seemed to possess a strange luminescence, a beacon in the shadows. I walked towards it slowly, my bare feet silent on the floorboards, each step feeling deliberate and heavy. The world had shrunk to this single point, this forgotten artifact of her presence. Everything else in the cavernous room, the bars, the sound system, the mirrors, faded into an insignificant periphery as I approached the small, ordinary object she had touched. My fingers wrapped around the cool plastic, and the sensation was an electric shock of connection. The bottle was no longer beaded with condensation, but it was not yet room temperature, still holding a trace of her body's residual cold. I unscrewed the cap with a slight tremor in my hand and brought the opening to my face. I took a deep, deliberate breath, inhaling the scent left on the mouthpiece. It was an impossibly intimate aroma, a mix of her floral shampoo, the faint, clean scent of her sweat, and something else, something uniquely her, a subtle, almost metallic tang that was the very essence of her energy. I pressed the bottle to my chest, holding it with both hands like a sacred relic. It was a foolish, desperate gesture, yet I could not stop myself. I closed my eyes and imagined I could feel the thrum of her heartbeat through the thin plastic, a phantom pulse against my own. In the silent hall, this small object was my only link to the storm of feeling she had unleashed in me. It was more than just a forgotten item. It was proof that she was real, that what had happened between us in this room was not just a figment of my own starved imagination. It was a promise, a tangible piece of her that I could possess. The moon had continued its slow arc across the sky, and the rectangles of light on the floor had shifted, leaving me shrouded in shadow. I stood there for a long time, clutching the bottle, breathing in the last traces of her scent until it faded into the dusty air of the studio. The initial quiet of the room had transformed, settling into a profound and hollow emptiness that now resided deep within my own chest. I did not feel the cold of the floor or the ache in my muscles anymore. I felt only a single, sharp point of focus, an obsession taking root in the darkness, centered on the woman who had danced with me and then simply walked away. It wasn't a sudden storm, but a slow, creeping tide that had been rising for weeks. The memory of the moment it all shifted was branded onto my mind, a point in time to which all other moments now tethered. It happened in the final moments of a grueling rehearsal, a point where exhaustion typically frayed the edges of our precision, leaving only raw muscle memory. The music, a fiery and desperate tango, had been driving us for hours, demanding a level of connection that blurred the line between performance and reality. We were both drenched in sweat, our bodies moving as one, our lungs burning with each sharp intake of air. The choreography demanded a final, dramatic pose, a confrontational separation where we would hold the last note suspended in the tense space between us. It was a moment of release, of breaking the intense connection the dance required. I was prepared for it, my body already anticipating the subtle shift in weight, the cooling of the air as her body pulled away from mine. The music swelled to its crescendo, a crash of piano keys and the mournful cry of a violin, and then it fell into absolute silence, the final note hanging in the air like an unresolved question. But she did not pull away. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, and instead of creating distance, she eliminated it entirely. With a breath that was more of a gasp, she stepped forward, closing the final inch that separated us. Her body pressed against mine with a defiant, possessive force that had nothing to do with the dance. It was a deliberate, unambiguous act, a violation of the unspoken rules of our professional partnership. Her chest heaved against mine, our frantic heartbeats sinking into a desperate, chaotic rhythm that echoed in the silent room. I was frozen, caught completely off guard by the sudden change in pressure and intent. Her hand, which should have been resting formally on my shoulder blade, slid down my spine with a slow, deliberate pressure. Her fingers found the sensitive dip at the small of my back, and they curled there, gripping the thin fabric of my top and the flesh beneath with a surprising strength. The gesture was possessive, proprietary, staking a claim that went far beyond the boundaries of our dance. It pulled my hips flush against hers, leaving no doubt that this was not a mistake, not an accident of momentum. Our faces were so close, I could see the fine, dark hairs of her eyebrows, the tiny beads of perspiration clinging to her upper lip. I could smell the heat coming off her skin, a clean, primal scent that was intoxicatingly honest. Her eyes, usually so focused and disciplined during our routines, were now wide and dark, the pupils blown wide with an emotion I couldn't immediately name, but felt resonating deep within my own body. In their depths, I saw my own reflection, a small, startled figure trapped in her intense, unblinking gaze. The world seemed to fall away, the mirrors, the bars, the high windows all dissolving into a blur. The only reality was the solid heat of her body pressed against mine, and the roaring in my ears that drowned out the studio's silence. It was a moment suspended outside of time, a breathless pause where the entire dynamic between us was being rewritten without a single word being spoken. The air crackled with unspoken things, with the raw, unfiltered energy that we had been channeling into our performance, now redirected and focused entirely on me. Her head tilted slightly, a subtle shift that brought her lips impossibly closer to mine. I felt her breath on my skin, warm and sweet, and my own breathing hitched in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, to reestablish the professional boundary she had just shattered. It would have been the sensible thing to do, the correct thing, the action that would preserve the careful balance of our partnership. But my body refused to obey. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a potent mixture of shock and a deep, burgeoning curiosity. I did not move away. I did not push her back. I remained perfectly still, a silent accomplice to this sudden, radical shift. In my stillness, I gave my consent. It was a passive surrender, an acknowledgement of a desire I had refused to admit even to myself, but that my body now recognized with an undeniable jolt of electricity. The tension between us was a physical thing, a taut wire humming with a dangerous, exhilarating frequency. Then, as slowly and deliberately as she had initiated the contact, she began to pull back. Her hand lingered at the small of my back for a heart-stopping moment before sliding away, leaving a trail of fire on my skin. Her eyes held mine for a second longer, a silent acknowledgement of the line we had just crossed. And then she turned and walked away without a word, picking up her water bottle from the windowsill as if nothing at all had happened. I stood alone in the center of the room, my body trembling slightly, my mind reeling. The air where she had been felt cold and empty. The tango was over, but something new and infinitely more complex had just begun. The rules had been broken, the script discarded, and I knew, with a terrifying and thrilling certainty, that nothing between us would ever be the same again. That single, silent moment of transgression became the new foundation upon which our partnership was built. The following rehearsals were exercises in exquisite torture, each one conducted in a thick, viscous atmosphere of unspoken awareness. The professional distance I had so carefully cultivated over the years, a necessary shield in a profession built on physical intimacy, had been shattered. Now there was no shield, only a raw, heightened sensitivity to her every movement, her every breath, her every glance. The air between us was permanently charged, a space filled with the resonant hum of an unplayed chord. The music, once our primary guide, became mere background noise. Our real communication now happened in the silent language of touch, in glances held a fraction of a second too long in the mirror. A casual brush of her fingers against my arm as we took our starting positions would send a jolt of heat through my entire body. The formal, choreographed contacts of our routines became fraught with a new, dangerous intimacy. Each touch was a question, and every reciprocal pressure was an answer. We were engaged in a high-stakes dialogue that had no words, only the escalating tension between our bodies. I watched us in the mirror, and the reflection that stared back was of two strangers. I saw not a pair of disciplined dancers executing a routine, but two lovers engaged in a clandestine public courtship. The lines of our bodies, once distinct, now seemed to blur and merge. our movements flowing into one another with a liquid grace that went beyond mere technical proficiency. It was as if we were being moved by a single shared impulse, a magnetic pull that was both terrifying and utterly irresistible. The story we were telling was no longer for a theoretical audience. It was a story we were writing for ourselves in real time. My professionalism, the bedrock of my career, began to crumble. The part of my brain that had always maintained control, that counted the beats and dictated the movements, was being drowned out by a rising tide of pure sensation. I found myself initiating contacts that were not in the choreography. My hand, meant to rest firmly on her waist, would slide lower, my thumb stroking the gentle curve of her hip. I would hold a lift a moment longer than necessary, just to feel the solid, living weight of her in my arms, to breathe in the scent of her hair against my cheek. And she, in turn, would respond. She was the one who had started this silent conversation, and she was a fluent, fearless participant. When my fingers brushed the back of her neck, I would feel the fine hairs there stand on end, a shiver passing through her that was not an act. During a close turn, she would let her head fall back, exposing the long, elegant line of her throat in a gesture of pure, unadulterated trust and surrender. Her breath would catch in her throat when I pulled her close, a small, audible hitch that was for me alone. The dance became our sanctuary and our battlefield. It was the only place where we could explore this burgeoning, forbidden connection with a veneer of plausible deniability. To any outside observer, we were simply two dancers with exceptional chemistry, committed to our art. But we knew the truth. We knew that every dip was a caress, every lift an embrace, every intense stare a silent confession of a desire that was rapidly becoming too powerful to contain within the structured confines of the choreography. I found myself becoming obsessed, my thoughts consumed by her, even when I was away from the studio. I would replay our rehearsals in my mind, dissecting every touch, every glance, searching for deeper meaning. The memory of her skin against mine, the scent of her perfume, the heat of her body, it all became a constant, low-grade fever that I carried with me throughout the day. I was losing my focus, my discipline, my self-control. I was losing myself in the intoxicating pull of her presence. One afternoon, during a particularly passionate rumba sequence, the line was irrevocably crossed. The music was sensual and slow, a rhythm that mimicked the beat of a lover's heart. As I guided her through a series of fluid, hip-swaying movements, our bodies were pressed so closely together that I could feel the soft crush of her breasts against my chest. Her leg was wrapped around mine, her thigh a warm, firm pressure against my own. It was a move we had done 100 times before, but this time was different. As I looked at our reflection, at the raw hunger in her eyes and the matching desire in my own, something inside me snapped. The last vestiges of my resistance gave way. Following the music's cue, I dipped her low, her back arching over my arm. But instead of holding the pose for the required 2 beats, I held it for 4, then 6. I lowered my head, my face hovering just inches from hers, and I saw her lips part in a silent invitation. The air grew thick, the world narrowed to the space between our mouths. I did not kiss her. Not yet, but in that extended, breathless moment, the promise was made. I broke the pose, pulling her back up into my arms, and we finished the routine in a daze, our bodies moving with a newfound tenderness, a shared secret knowledge. The dance had served its purpose. It had brought us to the edge of a cliff, and we had both, without a word, agreed to jump. The only question left was when. The final note of the music faded into the vast emptiness of the studio, but this time the silence was not an end. It was a beginning. We remained locked in our final pose, chests heaving, bodies slick with sweat, the space between us humming with a kinetic energy that had nowhere left to go. Her eyes, dark and bottomless, held mine in the mirror's reflection, and in them I saw the same reckless question that was screaming through my own veins. The unspoken pact made in our last rehearsal now demanded fulfillment. This was the moment of the jump. Slowly, as if moving through water, we broke the pose. Not to separate, but to flow into a different kind of movement. Her hand found mine, our fingers lacing together with a desperate, possessive grip. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. She led me, or perhaps I led her. We were simply moving as a single entity, drawn by an invisible current towards the small, unassuming door tucked away in the corner of the studio. The door to the utility closet, a place of shadows, dust, and forgotten things. The click of the door closing behind us was deafeningly loud, sealing us off from the moonlit expanse of the studio and plunging us into a tight, almost suffocating darkness. The air in the small space was thick with the scent of floor polish, old leather from discarded dance shoes, and a faint chemical tang of cleaning supplies. It was a wholly unromantic setting, yet in that moment it felt like the most sacred space in the world. Here, hidden from the judging eyes of the mirrors, there was no choreography, no performance, only a raw and overwhelming truth. The instant the darkness enveloped us, the last vestiges of restraint evaporated. She pressed me back against the rough wooden shelves, the hard edges digging into my back through the thin fabric of my top. The small shock of discomfort was instantly overwhelmed by the searing heat of her mouth on my neck. Her lips were not gentle or hesitant. They were ravenous, demanding, her kisses a frantic exploration of the sensitive skin along my collarbone. Her hands were a storm on my body, pushing under the hem of my shirt, her cool fingers a shocking contrast against my feverish skin. I responded with a matching, primal urgency, my own hands tangled in her thick, damp hair, pulling her face closer to mine, my body arching into hers. The polished, graceful movements of our dance were forgotten, replaced by a clumsy, desperate fumbling. I tore at the thin straps of her top, needing to feel her skin against mine without any barriers. The sound of the fabric ripping was a savage, satisfying punctuation to the silent, frantic struggle of our bodies. Her skin was smooth and hot, covered in a fine sheet of sweat that felt like silk under my fingertips. The cramped space forced an extreme, almost violent intimacy. Every shift of weight, every desperate gasp was magnified. I could feel the frantic thud of her heart against my ribs, taste the salt of her skin on my tongue. I slid down the wall, pulling her with me, until we were kneeling on the cold, dusty concrete floor amongst the clutter of mops and buckets. The position was awkward, undignified, yet it felt profoundly right. It was a stripping away of all artifice, a return to something elemental and animalistic. My hands moved down her body, over the taut plane of her stomach, to the waistband of her shorts. My fingers fumbled with the drawstring, my own desperation making me clumsy. She helped me, her hands covering mine for a moment, our shared goal a silent, urgent command. When the fabric was finally pushed aside, my hands found the heat of her, and a shudder racked her entire body. A low, guttural sound, a moan of pure pleasure and surrender, escaped her lips, and the sound was swallowed by the thick, dusty air of the closet. There, in the near total darkness, sight was useless. All that existed was the sense of touch, of scent, of sound. I learned the shape of her, the texture of her skin, the rhythm of her breathing with my hands and my mouth. Time dissolved. The world outside the closet door ceased to exist. There was only the escalating tension, the shared, ragged breaths, and the feeling of two bodies straining towards a single, explosive point of release. It was messy and raw and utterly devoid of the elegance we pursued on the dance floor. The climax, when it came, was not a graceful crescendo, but a violent, shuddering crash. Her body arched against mine, a silent scream caught in her throat, her nails digging into my shoulders. It was a moment of complete and total annihilation of the self, a breaking apart that was also a profound coming together. I held her through the aftershocks, my own body trembling in sympathetic resonance, our sweat-slicked skin clinging together in the cool, dark air. We remained there for an eternity, tangled together on the dusty floor of the utility closet, our breathing slowly returning to normal. The only sound was the frantic beating of our own hearts, a shared rhythm that gradually slowed to a steady, even pulse. The darkness that had at first felt suffocating now felt like a protective cocoon, a private world we had created just for ourselves. We had jumped from the cliff, and in the dark, chaotic freefall, we had finally, truly found each other. Emerging from the cramped, dusty darkness of the closet felt like being born into a new world. The main studio, now bathed in the silvery, ethereal glow of the full moon, seemed impossibly vast and serene. The air, cool against our flushed and sensitive skin, felt clean and sharp in our lungs. We were still naked, vulnerable under the silent, watchful gaze of the mirrors, but the shame or awkwardness I might have expected to feel was entirely absent. Instead, I felt a profound sense of rightness, as if we had shed not just our clothes, but a lifetime of pretense to arrive at this moment of pure, unvarnished truth. Her hand found mine again, not with the frantic urgency of before, but with a quiet, possessive tenderness. Our fingers interlaced, a simple, perfect connection. Without a word, I led her away from the shadows and into the center of the floor, into the brightest patch of moonlight. The polished wood was cool against the soles of our feet, a stark contrast to the lingering heat that still pulsed through our veins. This was our stage, the place where our public story was told, and it felt right to claim it now for this private, sacred right. There was no music, only the sound of our soft breathing and the almost imperceptible whisper of our skin as we moved. This was a dance that had no choreography, no counts, no rules. It was a slow, languid exploration, a conversation told in the language we knew best. I guided her in a gentle turn, my hand resting on the small of her back, feeling the delicate architecture of her spine beneath my palm. Her body was pliant, responsive, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to spring from a place of deep instinctual trust. I lowered her to the floor, her body sinking onto the cool, smooth wood with a sigh of surrender. The moonlight sculpted her form, casting soft shadows in the hollow of her throat, along the elegant curve of her hip, and down the long, powerful line of her legs. She was a masterpiece of light and shadow, a living statue that was mine to adore. I knelt beside her, not as a conqueror, but as a worshiper, overwhelmed by the sheer beauty of her, by the incredible, impossible gift of her presence. This time there was no hurry, no frantic desperation. My touch was reverent, my exploration slow and deliberate. I wanted to learn her, to memorize every inch of her with my hands and my lips. I started with her feet, kissing the high arch, the delicate ankle bone, feeling the slight tremor that ran through her at my touch. I traced the powerful muscles of her calves, the soft, sensitive skin behind her knees, the strong, sculpted line of her thighs. Every touch was an act of discovery, every kiss an act of devotion. Her role was one of pure receptivity. She lay perfectly still, her eyes closed, her body a canvas for my adoration. Her only response was in the subtle, involuntary language of pleasure, the soft hitch in her breath, the quivering of a muscle in her thigh, the way her fingers curled and uncurled on the floor beside her. She was giving me a gift of absolute trust, allowing me to see her, to know her in a state of complete and beautiful vulnerability. I was both the artist and the audience, creating and witnessing her pleasure as it slowly, exquisitely built. I moved higher, my lips brushing the gentle swell of her stomach, my tongue tracing the line of her ribs. I tasted the salt on her skin, a clean, honest flavor that was intoxicating. When my mouth finally found the peak of her breast, she arched her back, a soft, breathy moan escaping her lips, the first sound to break the profound silence of our communion. I felt a surge of possessive power, the thrill of knowing that I was the source of that sound, the architect of that pleasure. I was not just her partner anymore. I was her lover, her confidant, the keeper of her most secret, vulnerable self. The end came not as a crash, but as a long, slow, cresting wave. I felt the tension build in her body, a deep coiling of energy that I nurtured with a patient, knowing touch. When the release finally came, it was a silent, convulsive shudder that shook her from head to toe. Her back arched off the floor, her hands clenched into fists, her mouth opened in a silent scream of ecstasy. I held her through it, pressing my body against hers, absorbing the aftershocks, whispering her name against her skin until the trembling subsided, leaving her limp and boneless in the moonlight. Utterly and completely mine. Utterly and completely mine. I woke to the unfamiliar feeling of sunlight on my face, warm and insistent. For a moment, suspended in the hazy space between sleep and consciousness, I was disoriented. Then, the memories of the night flooded back in a warm, overwhelming rush. The studio, the moonlight, the scent and feel of her skin against mine. A slow smile spread across my face. I reached out, my hand moving through the empty space beside me in the bed, expecting to find her warm, sleeping form. The sheets were cold. My eyes snapped open. The room was quiet, filled with the gentle, indifferent light of a new day. Her side of the bed was empty, the pillow still bearing the faint indentation of her head, a silent testament that she had been real, that I had not dreamed her. A single long dark hair lay coiled on the white cotton, a stark and beautiful punctuation mark to the night we had shared. I picked it up, rolling it between my thumb and forefinger, a tangible piece of her left behind. I felt a pang of disappointment that she was gone, but it was quickly replaced by a warm, hopeful certainty. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my heart performing a light, fluttering dance in my chest. I expected to see a message, a string of words that would anchor the dreamlike quality of the night to the solid reality of the morning. My thumb swiped across the screen, my eyes scanning for her name. There was nothing. No good morning text, no missed call, only the mundane collection of overnight notifications from news apps and social media. A small, cold knot began to form in the pit of my stomach. Dismissing the feeling as early morning paranoia, I decided to give her space. Perhaps she had an early appointment. Perhaps she was simply shy in the light of day. I sent a short, simple message, careful to keep it light, not wanting to seem too eager, too desperate. Good morning. Hope you slept well. I watched the screen for a moment, saw the 2 gray check marks appear, indicating the message had been delivered, and then I set the phone aside, forcing myself to begin my day, certain that the reply would come soon. The hours crawled by with an agonizing slowness. Each buzz of my phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, followed by a sharp sting of disappointment when I saw it was just a work email or a junk notification. I checked our message thread 100 times, my eyes fixed on those 2 gray check marks. They never turned blue. The silence from her was a living thing, a presence that grew larger and more oppressive with each passing minute, suffocating the warm glow of the previous night. The cold knot in my stomach tightened, turning into a dull, heavy ache. By evening, the ache had blossomed into a full-blown panic. I called her, my thumb trembling as I pressed the icon. The phone rang once, a single hopeful pulse, and then the call was disconnected. I tried again, with the same result. She was not just unavailable, she was actively rejecting my calls. The reality of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The beautiful, intimate world we had built in the darkness of the studio had apparently dissolved in the harsh light of day, and I had been left stranded in the ruins, completely alone. The next week was a blur of confusion and a special kind of agony reserved for unanswered questions. She did not show up for our scheduled rehearsals. When I went to the studio, I found her locker cleaned out, a stark, empty metal box where her vibrant presence used to be. She had vanished from our shared world as completely as a ghost at sunrise, leaving no trace, no explanation, nothing but the deafening silence and the lingering scent of her perfume on my sheets, which I could no longer bear to sleep in. Finally, after 2 weeks of this torturous limbo, I saw her. It was a chance encounter, a cruel twist of fate. She was walking out of a different dance academy across town, laughing with a handsome man, his arm slung casually over her shoulders. Her new partner. I felt my world tilt on its axis. I called her name, my voice sounding weak and foreign to my own ears. She stopped and turned, her eyes landing on me. There was a flicker of something, surprise perhaps, but nothing more. There was no guilt, no sadness, no regret, just a cool, polite blankness. I approached her, my mind a chaotic whirl of questions, my heart a leaden weight in my chest, preparing to demand the explanation I so desperately needed, the one I knew would shatter me.